Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is Tuesday, the 22nd of April. It is the morning blast with myself and Mr. Michael Brown. I trust everyone had a wonderful Easter weekend, and everyone's ready to get back at it. I'm sure Mr. Michael Brown is going to tell me off and say, well, some of us were working yesterday as well. Well, I wasn't. I was in the garden doing some manual labour, so I'm feeling a bit sorry for myself today and aching. But before we crack on, let's get the legals out of the way. So, as usual, nothing discussed on this basis session constitute trading or investment advice or infers any kind of endorsement by PIQ or indeed myself, Mr. Ryan Paisley, and of course, the marvellous, the magnificent, the wonderful Mr. Michael Brown. How are you, my dear friend?
Well, very good morning, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully, you all enjoyed your long weekend. Some of us were working away hard at the
Told
desk
ya.
yesterday.
See that? See, told ya. I said he was going to say something like that. I told ya.
Do you know what? Even Zach was working yesterday. The one day that he's actually
Wow.
allowed a holiday, and he's put together a little roundup for the
He's actually,
great and the good of the internet.
yeah, he's back this week as well. So, he'll be planning his
Is he?
next trip very soon.
I was going to say, it must be
Um,
away the week after.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Probably some cruise or something. But anyway, yeah, go on. Sorry,
God,
Zach. Sorry. We love you, really.
no, we don't.
Wow.
Well, you might. Right, let's crack on. Very good morning, everyone. Happy belated Easter to you all. In terms of where markets stand this morning, I guess it's very much a case of the new week, but very much the same vibe across financial markets. And of course, that mood is one where participants are continuing really to sell the United States and trim their exposure to US based assets as much as they can, with equities, treasuries, and the dollar all sliding quite substantially towards the back end of last week and also yesterday, with gold continuing to act as pretty much the only haven out there. In terms of narratives over the last few days while we've been away for Easter, just to run through those first, going all the way back to last Thursday, of course, we had a policy decision from the European Central Bank, with the ECB delivering a 25 basis point cut in line with market expectations, while reiterating that they will take a data dependent and meeting by meeting approach to future policy decisions. The most interesting line from Christine Lagarde and her colleagues, though, was a note in the statement that the market response to tariffs imposed by the United States is likely to have what the ECB are terming a tightening impact on financial conditions. The implication of that being that the ECB are likely, therefore, to need to cut more and to cut more quickly in order to keep financial conditions at the level that they want them at. Of course, this has come much to the ire of the orange man in the Oval Office, with President Trump having ramped up his attacks on Fed Chair Powell over the last 3 or 4 days quite considerably. Towards the back end of last week, Trump was saying how Powell is always too late and wrong, his words, not mine, and that his
But,
termination cannot come soon enough. Go on.
so just worth pointing out, because it is very easy to forget that it was Trump that put Powell in office.
Yes, absolutely. 2018, Trump
Because
picked
he
Powell
binned
to
Yellen.
replace Yellen, exactly. And
Yeah.
of course, because he hasn't delivered the uber low rates that a real estate developer wants, he has now become something of a pariah. Trump then went on Thursday to say that, and again I quote, Powell will be out of there if I ask him. Of course, Powell has said on numerous occasions that if he is
No,
asked,
I
he will
won't.
not resign. Trump then went on Monday on Truth Social yesterday, calling Powell Mr. Too Late, a major loser, saying that he should lower rates now and that preemptive rate cuts are being called for by many. One, I'd like to know who the hell is calling for preemptive rate cuts in the United States, because I certainly haven't seen any respected economist call for that. And secondly, what Trump hasn't realised there is that you only deliver a preemptive rate cut if you think something bad is going to happen. So what he's effectively saying is all of these policies that I'm putting in place, they're probably going to have a negative impact, and I'd really like the
Well,
Fed to bail me
or
out here.
or you just want to see assets much higher because you want, low rates, and also, yeah, if it was up to him, they would be doing QE. Let's
Well, he
be
doesn't watch the
honest.
market, mate. He doesn't watch the market.
Oh no, sorry, of course. And when he does it, and when he does, it's the Dow.
Yeah, and he only looks at it if it goes up.
Yeah.
We also had some sources reporting via the Wall Street Journal that Trump has apparently, in private discussions, floated the prospect of firing Jerome Powell and replacing Powell with Kevin Warsh, who, of course, was a former governor at the Fed. And also, going back to what you were saying about 2018, Ryan, Warsh was reportedly in the running for the job that Powell ended up getting. So, how the tables turn on
Can
that one.
can we
Um,
can we just flag as well, because we you mentioned this last week, and I again I can't remember who it was talking to, and then I backed you up, and we were basically derided and basically outcast for saying it. But myself and Michael, and I think many people out there as well, I think Powell's done a very good job in his term
oh,
so far.
absolutely. Yeah,
I
I
think
fully agree.
considering what he's had to put up with, I know it's very, very, very easy to point fingers and laugh and and just slag off central bankers, but I genuinely think that he's been very, very good. Yes, you make mistakes, and everyone's going to point to transitory inflation, but it's always transitory over a not long enough time frame. But but genuinely, no one is perfect. I know it's very cliche, but no one's perfect. No one really knew what was going on, and it's great that people going, oh yeah, inflation's here to stay. So wait, it wasn't here to stay. And let's be honest, I
Mm,
think if they would have done things differently, it might have put us in a worse position entering COVID, and the knock on effects from that. So I think it's very hard to be very very critical. Of course, we can be critical of Powell. It's right to hold him to account to certain things, but just the outright um, damnation of him by certain people, by many people, in fact, I think it's misplaced, in personally,
mm.
but that's me.
No, I fully agree. I mean, I think if you look back, it was a little bit wibbly wobbly to start with, particularly when we had that whole business with the balance sheet runoff being on autopilot, and then of course assets just dumped in the fourth quarter of 2018. But since then, I think he's been very, very assured and frankly done a bloody good job. But
I
clearly
agree.
not a good enough job for President Trump. It is just worth mentioning on a sort of broader level here, just to put a bit of context around all of this. Powell has said on numerous occasions that he will not resign. I think he's been very, very clear on that one, and rightly so. Of course, his term comes to an end in May 2026 anyway, and it's pretty much a certainty that he's not going to be kept on in the job beyond that. It is also, as the law stands at the moment, not possible for a president to fire a Fed chair or a sitting Fed governor for that matter, unless it is for cause, and that is a legal term that is generally interpreted to mean either some sort of criminal offence or gross incompetence or negligence. Now, of course, a whole load of people on the internet have jumped on the last one and gone, oh, will he let inflation get to 10%? Is that not incompetence? No, it's not. Think about what gross misconduct means at work in an HR environment and
I wouldn't
translate
know,
that to
mate.
the Fed. Well, yeah, probably for the best that you don't, actually. But effectively, the point being, Powell is 99.9% likely not to be going anywhere anytime soon. The problem is that Trump has started to ramp up his attacks on the Fed chair and started to throw out all this rhetoric at a time when market participants were already losing faith in the haven value of treasuries and of the dollar, and also starting to think about diversifying their holdings outside of the United States, primarily as a result of the incoherent and volatile nature of policymaking when it comes to trade. Now you've got the potential for Fed independence to be under threat as well, and you're giving participants even more of an excuse, not that they really needed one, to further sell down their holdings of US assets. And that's exactly what we saw yesterday. The S&P and the Nasdaq closing down by about 2.5% apiece. The Treasury curve twists steepening, with big weakness coming in at the long end as 10-year yields rose by 7 basis points, 30-year yields rose by 10 basis points, the latter getting perilously close towards that 5% mark once more, and the 2-10 spread rising by 13 basis points to its steepest since the first quarter of 2022. Along with that, we saw the dollar continuing to roll over, with the greenback trading about 1% lower against a basket of peers, briefly dipping below the 98 mark, trading to new 3-year lows, and that is, as near as makes no difference, where we trade this morning, with the euro trading north of 115 at its best level since November of 2021, dollar yen dipping below below the 140 mark for the first time since the back end of last year, and also cable trading north of the 134 handle. As I said, very much the vibe is sell US, buy rest of the world, whether it be equity, whether it be fixed income, or whether it be currency. And of course, amid all of this, market participants continuing to seek a haven. Gold is that haven of choice, with the yellow metal gaining 2.9%
Gold.
yesterday. Oh, dearie me. And gold having added a further 1.5% this morning, trading north of $3,500 an ounce for the first time ever. Interestingly, I was running the numbers on this morning. Spot gold has rallied by 3% or more on just 48 occasions in the last 25 years. Three of those occasions have come within the last 2 weeks, which gives you an idea of how rapid and how violent this move higher in the
Oh,
yellow
do you know
metal
what?
has
I,
been.
I I do love a little stat like that. Have you posted that? Because I might have to repost that if you have posted it.
I have posted it, yes.
Oh, I'll give that a repost in a second. That's a great little stat. And also, I got to say, I doffed my cap to the gold bugs. I was very keen to take the piss out of people when it all fell out of bed again, and it hasn't. So yeah, egg on my face. But yeah, I'm happy for you.
Well, even a broken clock and all that, I suppose.
Well,
In any case, in terms of other bits and bobs from yesterday, of course, there were a few headlines on trade. Clearly, Trump saw that the market was trading lower because he decided to go out in front of the media and say that tariff negotiations are, quote, going well, and that everybody wants to negotiate. Just to give you a reminder that the whole idea of 90 deals in 90 days is currently running at 0 deals in 13 days. And even the talks with Japan, which were supposedly going to be the easiest and the quickest to get over the line, they appear to have hit a roadblock as well, with the Japanese side basically saying every time we talk to the United States, they seem to change their mind as to what they want, which is clearly inhibiting
uh,
progress.
whilst I completely, obviously you're spitting facts, so of course you're right. But what I would say, I don't think anyone was expecting deals in the first few weeks. As everything like this, I think it'll be a tidal wave, a tsunami. To get in the Japanese vibe,
Oh, God. Oh,
of
no.
deals to come along as the kind of the deadline is hit. Because also, let's be honest, a lot of these countries are going to be waiting to see what deals are struck with other nations before they're ready to sign. It'll be one of those like who's going to go first, kind of like everyone's on the edge of like the Masai Mara River waiting to cross. Who's going to be the first silly wildebeest to go first and risk the crocodiles, kind of thing. Well, that's my opinion anyway.
I think the Masai Mara are a tribe rather than a
Oh,
river,
the
but
river, the
I know,
Masai
I know
River, the
what you're
Masai,
saying.
no, the Masai. Yeah, maybe no, the Masai Mara is the Masai Mara is the Masai River, maybe, and the Masai Mara, I think, is the game reserve. I don't know. I was there when I was 8 years old. I nearly got kidnapped. That's a story for the pub. There you go.
I've actually heard that story as well. It's a cracker.
And it's true.
Anyway,
It's true. I was
moving
like
on
kidnapped.
from Ryan's kid, he opened his mouth and they let him go.
Wow!
5 minutes was enough.
Wow! Oh my god! All right, does anyone want
Uh,
to step in and take Michael's place tomorrow? No, please don't. Please don't. We
oh
love you.
dear.
Right,
Right.
carry on.
Moving on from Ryan's kidnap, there were a few other trade headlines yesterday. The Mexican PM Scheinbaum saying that the Mexicans and the US failed to reach any sort of final agreement in her call with President Trump last week. We also heard from China yesterday. They were basically issuing a bit of a warning to countries. Basically, do not do a trade deal with the United States and it harms our interests. This is kind of feeding in to some of the reporting that we had last week, where this whole idea has come about of the US are effectively trying to strike deals with everyone apart from China and then go to China as a group. Well, China have turned around and gone, well, if you do that, fine, but we might impose some reciprocal countermeasures on you. So almost a sort of proxy version of the trade war, if you like, and also starting to see an increasing sort of quote unquote real world impact of trade tensions as well. DHL yesterday out with a statement saying that they
Yeah.
are now suspending or temporarily suspending until further notice deliveries into the United States worth more than $800 due to what they are calling a significant increase in red tape at customs following the introduction of the new tariff regime. If DHL are doing it, I would expect most of the other parcel firms to do it as well. Away from trade, a couple of other bits and bobs just worth mentioning in terms of yesterday. We did hear from the Fed's Goolsby. He was saying how basically the Fed just need to sit on their hands and wait and see what's going on, but he still believes that rates will be lower in 12 to 18 months' time than they are at the moment. And a couple of headlines on the AI/computer chip front. Firstly, Huawei, they are planning to begin mass shipments of their 910C artificial
Oh
intelligence
yeah,
chip.
yeah,
They
yeah.
will be going out to Chinese customers as early as May. This is according to sources cited by Reuters. And last but by no means least, I will caveat this by saying that I'm not entirely sure how accurate these sources' stories are. They came via a website called Semi Accurate, which I think is the worst ever name for a website. But apparently, they were reporting that NVIDIA's upcoming chip has been delayed due to what they're calling major problems. Apparently, this new problem is serious and has delayed the device by months with no fix in sight. As I said, I have absolutely no idea whether semi-accurate is an accurate source or otherwise, but it was a story that was doing the rounds yesterday, and Nvidia were down by about 5 or 6% anyway, so thought it was worth mentioning. If it's not accurate, then don't shoot the messenger. Go and complain to semi-accurate yourselves, please. And for the moment, that
Exactly.
is all from me.
And everyone loves a good semi. Um, oh
Oh
God,
God!
Brian. Oh
Oh
God.
no!
Oh no. What I was about to say before I went all smutty was got before I just crack on with the overnight news headlines via our good friend Zach. I was gonna. You mentioned Scheinbaum. I gotta say, out of all the political turmoil that's going on in the world. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it appears that Mexico has probably got, well, in my opinion, one of the most stable and kind of uh, leaders with her head screwed on more than any other nation that I can think of at the moment. I think the Mexicans have done very well handling Trump. Obviously, they were very proactive before the whole tariff announcements by sending it. They had a team basically stationed in Washington for a month or so. They seem to be the ones that other nations are looking to see. Well, bearing in mind the border kind of issues, the water issues that we've got now. I think Scheinbaum is kind of a leader to be looking to for inspiration on how to handle Trump. So hats off to her. But anyway, moving on.
Indeed.
Um, some overnight news headlines via our dear friend Zach. Obviously, these can be found in our Substack, pin tweet, etc., etc. And so, starting off with some trade headlines. Obviously, some of this is being kind of brushed on by Michael. Japan sees little scope for a grand FX deal with the US and will resist pressure to strengthen the yen through interventions or immediate rate hikes. Japan's finance minister confirmed talks are being scheduled with Treasury Secretary Bezant to discuss FX and tariff-related economic support. The USTR confirmed that a roadmap on reciprocal trade talks and tariffs with India have been finalised. Just a sidebar on this one. I'm going to speak to my good friends at AlphaPix on this because I think they might be worth writing an article on this. I do think that India are very well placed to make a lot of gains on China after all of this because, we're seeing. We'll come on to it in a minute, but we're seeing that they're opening the doors to Amazon and Walmart as part of these negotiations. Obviously, if we're restricting sales or imports from China, there's a lot of Amazon goods come in via
Mm.
China. So potentially there's scope for these manufacturers to move to a nation that's far more friendly with the US, such as India. And also we know that geopolitically wise, India and China obviously share quite a lengthy border. There's always some skirmishes where they literally do chuck rocks at each other because if they pick up a gun, then it escalates. So they're allowed to throw stones. I do think this one to watch. I think India very, very well placed, but I think we need to get someone far smarter than me to look into this. But anyway,
I would just
um,
caution on that. Just I agree with
go
everything
on.
you've said, but the USTR coming out and saying XYZ, this is the bloke who claimed that he didn't know reciprocal tariffs were going to be
Oh
shelved half an hour
no, no,
before they were.
no,
Um,
no, absolutely. Yeah, I'm moving slightly away from this headline in
yeah,
precisely, but I mean in general, it just feels like
yes,
the vibe is good because especially as they're looking to pick up more LNG and stuff like that. But anyway, that's one for another
we
time.
digress.
Pardon?
We digress.
We do, as always. U.S. trade officials finalised tariff levels of up to 3,521% on Southeast Asian solar panel imports, effectively blocking them from the U.S. market. That's a hell of a number. If that number is legit, I'm waiting for Zach to tell me that I'm wrong there, but 3,521% is a biggie. Vietnam and Thailand are both adjusting trade tactics to avoid steep US tariffs, with Hanoi cracking down on illegal transshipments and Bangkok facing a US requested negotiation delay. We've this negotiation delay with Bangkok was released this morning, or announced this morning. Again, this is obviously via the US, and at the moment, as the time of us going to record, we don't know why this is. So when you're playing this back, which we know many of you do, perhaps we know the reason already. As Michael said, spot gold hit $3,500 an ounce, first time ever, as safe haven demand continues to rise. Oh, that number was right. So that's a very chunky tariff. Wall Street Journal's Timoraeus, the Fed whisperer,
Oh
reports that
God.
Trump is laying the groundwork to blame Powell for any economic downturn. I think we could have all told you that, Tim. Bearish dollar bets are now nearing levels that could trigger a technical rebound. North Dakota's economy
The
is
old
under
Elliott
pressure as
waves
falling
have
crude
been out
prices
again, have
link.
they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. North Dakota's economy is under pressure as falling crude prices linked to Trump's trade war threaten the oil and gas sector. This is quite an important one because this was obviously these are the states that really were pro-Trump during the election, and they seem to be getting the ones that hit more than others. So one to keep an eye on, especially with Trump's approval ratings, and we know he likes to be seen as the president that everyone loves. Chinese ports processed 10% more containers year on year in April, thanks to the 90-day delay on reciprocal tariffs. Obviously, everyone's front loading these. Japan's finance minister says 10% of domestic firms have already felt tariff impacts, with more expecting disruption. Japanese investors sold 20 billion with a B in foreign bonds in the first half of April as tariff jitters escalated. Offshore yuan borrowing costs in Hong Kong hit the lowest level since data began in 2013, adding downward pressure to the currency. In equities and corporate headlines, Alphabet reportedly pays Samsung an quote enormous sum each month to pre-install its Gemini AI Assist, despite prior rulings finding the practice illegal. So one to watch for some backlash on that. Suntory's CEO warned that Trump's tariffs could spark a recession and chill corporate investment in the US. Roche plans to invest 50 billion with a B into the US pharma and diagnostics business over the next 5 years. Nomura will acquire Macquarie's US and European asset management units for 1.8 billion. That's as Nomura pushes into the European and US markets. Helvetia will acquire Belus to form Switzerland's second largest insurer. Elliott has built a short position worth 79 million against Antofagasta. That's the mining giant, about 0.52% of the miner's share capital. India, as we said before, is under tariff pressure to grant Amazon and Walmart's Flipkart full market access. This could be a bit of a game changer for both Walmart and Amazon. NEO, the Chinese EV manufacturer, has delayed its European launch of the Firefly EV to Q3, citing underestimated expansion challenges. LG and Samsung, they're suing India's government to challenge the new e-waste recycling payouts. US patients are losing access to cheaper weight loss drug replicas as regulation tightens. I think we're going to see more of this as Kennedy starts getting involved and trying to cut down on generic drugs and such like that. And just finally, from me, some geopolitical headlines. Russian troops have retaken the St. Nicholas Monastery in the border village of Gornal, ending a 10-day standoff with Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region. As a reminder, things are kind of, I'm not going to say coming to a head because we've heard this before, but things are looking a little bit brighter on peace talk front, especially as Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed bilateral peace talks with Ukraine for the first time since the early stages of the war. President Zelensky said that Kyiv is open to discussions focusing on halting attacks on civilian targets. One to note as well, but obviously we weren't here yesterday, but over the supposed Easter truce, both sides are claiming that the other side broke the truce. So one to keep an eye on there. Obviously, any peace talks or anything that goes further on that front is welcomed by all sides, especially us. China has arrested a former senior anti-corruption official on suspicion of, wait for it, corruption,
Oh dear.
accepting bribes, continuing its sweeping crackdown on internal graft. So
Well,
that's it for me at the moment.
it's
Go
funny you
on.
mention that because the UK's anti-corruption minister has also been
Oh
indicted
yeah,
on corruption charges in Bangladesh. So, or the
is she
ex
still an
ones.
MP?
I think she's an MP, but I
I
think
don't.
she got sacked from the cabinet or whatever it was.
Okay. Is Keith Vaz still an MP?
I don't think so.
Well,
And I
I'm not going
don't
to go
think
into
we
why
should
I'm
say
asking
any
that
more
question.
because we're going to end up with a fucking libel case on our shoulders or something if we're not careful with that
And
one.
do yourself a favour, listeners. Give Keith Vaz and washing machines
Oh no.
right. And that's enough for me. Back to you in the studio. I'm just going to go quickly write a CV.
Oh, right. Let's spin on to something else then, shall we? In terms,
Hey!
hey,
Oh, well played. Well played.
oh dear. Right. In terms of the week ahead, then, obviously, well, it's Tuesday morning because, of course, Europe was away yesterday, but we do have a relatively quiet data docket ahead of us today. Just a couple of notable releases at 3 o'clock this afternoon. The latest consumer confidence figures out of the Eurozone, and we also have the latest Richmond Fed manufacturing data out of the States. That index expected at -6 from a prior -4, and of course, it's an input that feeds into expectations for the ISM manufacturing print that we will get towards the back end of next week. Do just bear in mind the Richmond Fed number seems to be coming out about half a minute early these days. God knows why, but that's how it seems to be happening over the last few months. In terms of other bits and bobs, then, in terms of today and also the remainder of the week, it is going to be a very, very busy week in terms of corporate earnings. We have 27% of the S&P 500 by market cap reporting this week, which makes it the second busiest week of first quarter earnings season. Notable reports include Magnificent Seven names such as Tesla, who report after the market close today, as well as Alphabet, aka Google, who report after the market close on Thursday. But other notable reports throughout the week come from Verizon and General Electric today, Boeing, who report before the open tomorrow, IBM after the close tomorrow, and then on Thursday, we have a whole host of airlines, including American Airlines and Southwest, as well as chipmaker Intel, who also report after the market close. It's also a busy week this week in terms of US supply, with a 2-year auction today, a 5-year sale on Wednesday, and then a 7-year auction on Thursday. Of course, this comes as treasuries continue to sell off, although that weakness is obviously concentrated at the long end of the curve as that broad sell America vibe continues. It is also a busy week in terms of central bank speakers. This week is the annual IMF World Bank meetings in Washington, D.C., which is basically an excuse for all these people to go on a free, all expenses paid holiday and do as many media interviews as they possibly can. But it does mean we are going to have an absolute deluge of policymakers making remarks across newswires as the week progresses. Obviously, not going to go through all of them, but the main highlights include ECB President Lagarde, who will be giving an interview to CNBC at around about 3 o'clock London time this afternoon, and also BOE Governor Andrew Bailey, who speaks Wednesday evening, of course, as markets continue to fully price a 25 basis point rate cut for the Bank of England's next meeting at the beginning of May. In terms of other bits and bobs to keep an eye on this week, as I said, the data calendar is a little bit light, although we do have a whole host of flash PMI figures tomorrow from pretty much every major global economy. We also tomorrow get the release of the Fed's Beige Book of anecdotal economic evidence. Usually I'd stand here and say, ignore the beige book. It's a complete waste of time. But Powell and various other FOMC policymakers have been seemingly placing a bit more weight on the beige book of late than they have
Yeah,
done previously. So it
I
might
gotta
be worth
say,
bearing in mind.
maybe it's just because I like a bit of like out there data and stuff. But I've always been quite a fan of the Beige Book, not for kind of a direct trade based off of it, but I'm a big fan of the anecdotal stuff.
Yeah, and I think in a time like this where we know that the hard data is just massively skewed, you
Yeah.
look at something
Oh,
like
absolutely.
GDP, Q1's going to be horrific, mainly because of import front running. Q2 will probably rebound because all of that import front running isn't happening.
Yeah.
So that sort of anecdotal data becomes, considerably more important, as you rightly say. Just lastly, in terms of other bits and bobs to keep an eye on this week, Thursday we have the latest IFO sentiment surveys out of Germany. Sentiment will probably puke given the tariff to and fro. Out of the States, we get durable goods orders, jobless claims, where the continuing print pertains to the April non-farm payroll survey week, and also existing home sales. And then Friday, the week wraps up with retail sales due out of the UK and Canada, and also the final read on consumer sentiment from the University of Michigan for April. And of course, as we move through the remainder of the week, we will be on alert for whatever President Trump may have to say at any moment moment in time, whether that be media interviews or posts on Truth Social, particularly in terms of trade and continued attacks on the Fed, but also potentially geopolitics, or frankly, whatever else the bloke feels like
And this is
talking
why
about.
you need to be following both myself and Michael on Twitter. You need to be logged into your PIQ platform, and also little sneaky, little sneaky kind of first look for you guys is we've got a new mobile look website coming very very soon, and
Ooh.
also another product being launched very soon, which is an embeddable news aggregation widget. Which, if anyone, if you guys have a website or whatever, or you know someone with a website that you want news on your website, give us a shout, because we've got a very very cool little interactive widget that you can embed, and also a Discord bot coming, which is, there's a lot going on at PIQ Towers. So get involved. Give us a shout if you want any of it on your websites, your Discord groups, or whatever. That's my shameless plug.
Even better. Well, that's pretty much it from me this morning. Although our replies to this space are now filled with nonsense about Keith Vaz, I've just seen. So,
Go on,
on
Dunny.
that note, I will hand it back to
Right,
you.
Michael, thank you so much. Again, we hope everyone had a great Easter weekend. If you did have it off, yes, Michael was working yesterday. He doesn't have to tell us again. Um, but
Bring your violin
Yeah,
tomorrow, please.
exactly. Listeners, thank you as always. I know I always say it, but we really, really, really do appreciate you listening in, especially our regular listeners. And to those of you, many, many of you, which replay this back after the live recording, welcome from the past. And we will see you tomorrow. See you later. I'm going mad.
Bye for now. Going, you went a long time ago.
Fuck you.